Hello, both sides of the conversation family. We welcome you to this virtual space crafted especially for you. My name is Jada Curry, and I'm both sides of the conversation's marketing director and graphics design specialist. I want to take some time to ground us all as a community into this space we are about to open up in, so let's go through our community standards. Both sides of the conversation is providing a safe and honest space for open conversation, so we ask that you all be respectful of that. We also ask that you be respectful of each panelist, host, and participant. We do encourage healthy debates and conversations. Don't personalize anything with anyone. This includes name-calling, bullying, trolling, or shaming. This will not be allowed or tolerated. Your perspective is yours. It is not a prescription. You do not have to agree, but show respect. These community standards apply to all of our live shows and any virtual spaces that we hold on social media, including YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. We want to make sure that we are caring for each other as a community. This is our priority in all of our endeavors as both sides of the conversation. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed today's show and continue to stay in touch with us via YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or all of them. All right, thank you for listening and see you soon.
Welcome everybody to both sides of the conversation. I'm Executive Director John Henry. Today is Thursday, so you know what that means. We're going to have another educational presentation. This is the first one of the new year, so we are excited to be kicking 2022 off. You all know last year, as we ended the year, we talked about how in 2022, we are focusing on our Black and brown health as well as our finances. We are doing so many financial literacy educationals this year, as well as health. We are covering all health. We're going to be talking about mental health. We're going to be talking about the different things that impact us in our community as far as COVID, a number of things. And we're just happy to get started of this new year off right. And you all please excuse me because I want to thank everybody that's been checking on me. I took the booster shot on Monday and I have been down under the weather. And I did get some of the negative impacts of that shot, and I'm getting myself together back here, getting my strength back. So thank you for all that have been checking on me, making sure I'm good. I'm getting better every day. But we are kicking off this year. We are excited. We have a phenomenal doctor and researcher from Ucsf coming on tonight to educate the community about neuroscience. We're talking about brain health and Alzheimer's in our community, a very, very important topic that we need to really bring to the forefront in our community. So we are excited about tonight's educational presentation. So looking forward to be getting them up here on the screen soon. But with that being said, as you all know, every year we have to get into our announcements. Thank all of our sponsors and continued support from folks that's been continuing to support us. We thank you all, and we're going to kick this new year off right, day by day, week by week, as we start bringing everything back up. Thank you to our Both Sides of the Conversation team. They have been grinding all through the holiday season, getting things ready, putting things in place, and we're looking for some amazing things that's going to come out this year. So just excited. Please tune in and follow us because it's going to be some amazing things that we're going to be doing this year. But with that being said, one of the top news stories that have been really hitting the community pretty hard, as you all know, over the New Year's holiday, George Floyd's 4-year-old niece was shot. Where there was gunshots going off at the New Year's Eve. Every year we fight this across this country. We always try to encourage people, please do not fire firearms into the air. But the young 4-year-old niece of George Floyd was shot in the stomach. And right now they're saying she's in stable condition. So just glad to hear that. But again, we starting the year off with senseless violence in our community across the Bay Area. There's been a number of shootings and violence incidents, and we're going to continue to have to do our work in our community to make sure that we put a cease to some of this violence that's taking place. Sad to be getting off into the new year like that, but this is just what it's been, and also an uptick in COVID cases. As you all know, the American variant has just been spreading through our community. We have been getting impacted here in the Bay Area as these numbers surge. So we are still encouraging folks to please get vaccinated. And if you're not vaccinated, please wear masks and social distance and practice, do all the safety practices, as we're trying to make sure that this virus don't spread any further in our community. The faster we can get more people vaccinated, the quicker we can slow down the spread of this virus throughout our communities. I mean, this stuff is impacting our communities in so many ways, and sometimes we don't even think about it. As you all heard, the Chicago School District and a number of other school districts have voted to stay home and put online courses back in place. And for some families, that's an impact when you have single mothers out here who raise kids and they have young babies and they can't get to work because the kids are home at school. I mean, this stuff impacts us in many, many ways. So please, community, do your part. If you've been on the fence, you don't know if you want to get it, please consider and think about some of the impact greater than yourself that impacts the people of our community. So just wanted to put that out there. But sad story for George Floyd's niece. Hurt to see and hear that type of stuff happening still in our community, but just great to know that she's in stable condition. Also, 100 of the hostages that was freed in Nigeria. I'm not sure if people are aware. It's a bunch of women and kids who were taken hostage, and I think about 97 was freed and 19 babies or a dozen more were back to their families. Sad situation happening. You know, we got to bring, I know it's been a push for some of the stuff that's been going on, but across this world, there's been a lot of things happening to the young males and young females of our community, and we got to continue to protect our women, not only across the seas, but here in America as well. As human trafficking is on a rise. I was reading some articles today. Our young women in the community are being snatched off the street left and right day to day. So parents, people in the community, keep your eyes open, be vigilant. Make sure you're watching our young ladies and young men in the community. Very, very important stuff. For some of the both sides of the conversation announcements, we are still open for our Amazon Smile. If you would like to support our organization and put us under your Amazon Prime as one of the charitable organizations, you could do that with no extra charge to you. But every time you purchase something, some of that will go to help support both sides of the conversation for some of the things that we're doing. Our Giving Tuesday pledge is still going on through February 22nd. If you would like to donate or support what we're doing to continue to grow this platform and continue to grow the work that we're doing to the community, you can check out our website and get that information. Please sign up for our newsletter. All that information is there, and we'll definitely be thankful for all the support that we can get as we continue to do the things that we do in our community. With that being said, we have a few community announcements, and I know more are coming in as we're kicking off the new year. But next Friday is a very, very important meeting for Black San Franciscans. Or you in San Francisco, we need you to come out and support. This is a real call to action. We're talking about the state of Black San Franciscans. It's going to be next Friday, the 14th, from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. We have a phenomenal list of guest speakers who are going to be talking about some of the disparities and some of the issues that are impacting our folks in San Francisco. It is a number of sponsors that's going to be a part of this event, and we're happy that we're going to be a part of it, both sides of the conversation as well. But looking forward for everyone coming out. It's time to really talk about where we at and some of the things and some of the actions that need to take place from our supervisors and from our mayor, and just things that we need to put in play to help our families out. As you all know, there's some struggles that we are still dealing with. And tonight you're going to hear even more about some of the health disparities that impact our community. We got to fix it. And it starts with action, people coming together, talking about it, and making sure that things take place. Also, there's night karaoke every Saturday at Cafe Envy. This is a Black-owned cafe here in San Francisco at 1701 Yosemite Street. The doors open at 6 p.m. to 11 p.m. every Saturday night. We always want to support our Black and brown businesses here. Please go out and support. If you're out having a good time, support a Black business, go out and do some karaoke. With that being said, our both sides of the conversation, the East Oakland Collective, we're presenting a free bowling day to the community. I know we talked about it all last year. We are getting close. Hopefully COVID doesn't get in the way and impact us, but it is on President's Day weekend, February the 19th from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. at Seabow Entertainment. Please, this is a registered event. This is a family event, but it is free for all families and kids. We will have the entire bowling alley for everyone to come enjoy. We will be having to wear our masks. And we will be having some rapid testing and things like that in play to make sure that our folks is safe. But this is a very, very important to me. As you all know, I lost my mom last September, and she was a professional bowler at a time, one time in her life, and we're going to honor this event and her and my cousin who are big time bowlers. But this is a community event. It's special to me, an honor of my mom, and I want to make sure that all of our community come out. Everything is free. The food is free. Everything. We just want community to come out, be safe, and I'm looking forward. Hopefully, we'll see you out there. But it is a registered event, so please go to our Eventbrite or sign up on our website, and that information will be there. Or make sure that you sign up on our newsletter to get it. With that being said, the All My Cultural Participation Project is presenting the San Francisco District Empathy 3 Days of Kings. That is happening tonight, actually, from 5 to 7. I missed that, Mission and Ocean. So that's going on tonight. My brother Maurice and them, they're out there doing it. For some reason, I thought it was next week, but it's tonight. So they're out there celebrating with community. Women are wanted. Just for women out there, there's a need for women in San Francisco, San Mateo, Santa Clara counties to join the Women's Trade Show. It's a virtual workshop. They are trying to get women into the construction trades. They have an orientation. It's a pre-apprenticeship training program. There is room for women. If you want to get into construction, if you like to weld, if you're an electrician, or if you want to be a plumber, if you want to know some of that handyman stuff, it ain't so handyman anymore. It's going to be handy women and handyman. But they are encouraging women to apply. This is just for women. So if you are looking for a career shift or a career change, and you feel you have what it takes to get into an apprenticeship program for the construction trade, please check out that program that's going on. I think it is very, very beneficial. There is a number of women who are jumping into the trades, and a lot of those trades positions are paying $75 to $85 an hour when you're talking about welding and electricity. And I said it last time, they say the best welders in our trade are women because they have a steady hand when it comes to welding pipe. Guarantee you it's an opportunity for you ladies out there. Check it out. Great program if you want to be a part of it. MANA presents the Postpartum Support Circle. I think this is at Rafiki's. They're doing their sign up on the third Thursday of every month. You need to reach out to Ruth. We'll get the information up there for you all to be a part of that. There's a number of other programming that is coming up that we'll be getting out next week. As we start getting into Black History Month, there's a number of organizations that are going to be doing stuff to honor them, and we'll be getting that information out. And if you have an event that you would like us to get on the air or on our social media handles, please submit all that information to events@bsotc.org, and we'll make sure we get it out there to the community. But before we get started, the last thing, our next Tuesday show will be our Hidden Gem show. We will not have a Sunday conversation this week as we are getting ready for the kickoff on January 16th. For our next Sunday conversation, we are talking sickle cell. As we said, this year we are talking about health, and we're going to have a conversation about sickle cell and how sickle cell is impacting our community, some of the awareness and resources that are needed. And we're looking forward to seeing the guests and talking about sickle cell in our community. But next Tuesday, we will have a Hidden Gem segment where we will continue to highlight our Black and brown businesses, as well as those community leaders and organizations that do positive things to impact our community. So looking forward to continue to move these shows along as we get through the New Year's. With that being said, enough of me. You've heard enough of me talking today. Tonight, it is time to bring up our presenters for tonight. They've been waiting patiently, and we're going to get them up to talk about the Alzheimer's and some of the brain health that we need to know about in our community. So with that being said, we're going to bring up Charles Winden. He's a doctor at UCSF, and he's going to go ahead and introduce himself to community. Charles, glad to have you here. Go ahead and let the community know who you are, what you're doing to impact community, brother.
Thanks so much for the warm welcome, John. Truly a pleasure to be here with each and every one of you this evening. As John mentioned, my name is Dr. Charles Winden. I'm one of the assistant professors here at the University of California, San Francisco. I work at the Memory and Aging Center here. I did my training here. I'm originally from Los Angeles, but found a new home in the Bay Area. And coming to you this evening, really just to talk with you about brain health in the African American and the Latino community, and really about some of the disparities that exist. One of the things I'm particularly passionate about is trying to clear up some of these disparities and ensure that our communities really are getting the best brain health care possible.
All right, thank you. With that being said, we're going to bring our researcher, Miss Ashley Jackson.
Hi, my name is Ashley Jackson. I'm a clinical research coordinator at the UCSF Memory and Aging Center. Thank you so much for having me. I primarily work in research with people living with various neurological diseases such as frontal temporal dementia, Alzheimer's, primary progressive aphasia. And so I'm extremely passionate about helping people in our community live healthier lifestyles and just to live longer lives. Thank you.
Wow, great information. Looking forward to the presentation. So with that being said, turn it over to you, Dr. Charles. We'll pull your presentation up and let you get started.
Wonderful. So this evening, as I mentioned, I want to speak with you all a bit about brain health and specifically Alzheimer's disease and dementia within the African American community. I'm hoping that as we kick off 2022, you can keep this in kind of the back of your mind and maybe make this the year to really kind of get your brain health checked out or get the brain health checked out of an individual you may love or care for, whether it be a parent, friend, etc. So first and foremost, a couple of basic things. A little bit of information about a healthy aging brain versus an unhealthy aging brain. So just like every organ in our body, our brain undergoes changes as we age. By the time we're 80 years old, for example, our brain weighs much less than it did when we were, say, 30. Our brain receives actually less blood flow overall, and our brain has fewer nerve fibers. Nerve fibers are all the wiring within the brain itself that allows the brain to function. We know also that these changes in the brain can actually result in symptoms that we experience. We may notice, hey, it's tougher for us to remember names. It's harder for us to focus on a task. We may not walk kind of with as great balance as we used to. And so all of these changes happen as a result of the brain aging. The other thing we realize and know is that there are different parts of the brain that control different things. So the picture here is a very simple picture, really just detailing the different parts of the brain and what are some of the things they kind of control, so to speak. So the back of the brain, which is called the occipital lobe, is really responsible for vision. So you can actually be blind, but not have anything wrong with your eyes if the back part of your brain is not functioning well. Right below that is a part of the brain called the cerebellum, which is really important for balance and coordination. Up top, you have the two areas of the brain that control sensation and movement. So all of the information that we get from the world when we touch the hot stove or we feel the cool breeze across our face, all of that information gets up to a certain part of the brain. And then if we want to move in a certain way, we want to throw a ball, we want to pick something up, we want to walk in a certain fashion, there's a specific part of the brain that is kind of linked to that activity as well. The front part of the brain is really what makes us special as human beings. It's really essentially what controls everything. The front part of the brain allows us to do complicated math problems. It allows us to be creative and make music. It allows us to do so many things that separate us from animals and other organisms. And then finally, on either side of the brain, you have the areas for memory. So memory and language in particular. And so in the healthy aging brain, you have changes in all of these areas that occur, but they may actually not all occur at the same rate. And in the unhealthy aging brain, likewise, you may actually have some of these areas of the brain that are more affected more quickly compared to others. So let's talk about what is normal. Okay, so as we age, there is what is called normal age-related cognitive changes, which is just a fancy term for saying as you get older, your brain function kind of changes. How does that come up? What are some of the things you may experience? Well, feeling like it's tougher to learn or memorize or retain new information. Some of us who have maybe tried to learn a new language or tried to pick up a new skill have recognized as we get older, hey, this is a lot tougher than it was, when I was a younger child. Difficulty recalling the name of a place or a person. We can visualize who the person was. We can remember sitting in the restaurant ordering, but when somebody asks us the name, we're just kind of stuck. We can't quite pull it up. Difficulty staying focused on a task. So some of us really, as we get older, recognize I can't focus the way I used to. I can't sit there and have this really laser-like focus for hours on end. I just lose focus and I get distracted easily. We may have difficulty recalling some of the details of an event, even though we know we were there. So we go to a party, we go to a function. I know I was there. I know who I talked to, but there's kind of a section of the event I don't really remember that well. After we finished playing, guitar, I don't really remember what happened afterwards before I went home. We may have trouble coming up with words in a conversation. So many of us experience kind of the tip of the tongue. The word is right there, but you can't quite pull it up. And then a lot of us will feel just cognitively slower. So as we get older, it just feels like the gears are turning more slowly up top and we're not thinking as quickly as we used to. So these are all normal age-related changes, basically. So as you get older, these are some of the things that you may start to experience. Now, it's important to contrast that with what is kind of dementia or unhealthy brain aging. So we know that the brain can develop diseases where we have cognitive changes that are far beyond what would be considered normal for just aging. So what does that look like? Something normal that we just talked about would be, okay, I can't quite come up with the right word, but later on, oh, that's the word I wanted to say. Something that would be abnormal is I can no longer actually use half of my vocabulary. Something that might be normal is, okay, I'm driving and for a brief second, maybe I get a little turned around or, I don't remember kind of this because they're doing construction, etc. Something that would be abnormal is I'm driving and I'm getting lost. I get lost just a couple miles from my home and have to call someone to pick me up. So those kinds of changes, the changes where we start to have problems with our day-to-day function, those are not normal in any situation. And the reason some of those happen is because just like other organs in the body, the brain can develop disease as we get older and older. These diseases can lead to what is called dementia. So we're going to get a little bit more into the terminology in just a little bit, but dementia just simply means that you've experienced changes in your thinking, memory, such that you can no longer really care for yourself independently. That is purely what dementia means. It's different from Alzheimer's, and we're going to get into that in a little bit, okay? Dementia is not part of normal aging. So one of the big misnomers is that people think, well, mom or dad or, grandpa, he's just older. He's just supposed to be like that. That's just what normally happens to old people. That is not true at all. And so if that is kind of your frame of reference and what you feel like typically happens as we age, I want you to try to get rid of that thought this evening. Dementia, getting to a point where you can't take care of yourself because of how bad your memory and thinking have gone, that is never a part of normal aging. That's not supposed to happen to us while we're alive here on this planet. Okay, so a little bit about timeline. What are we talking about in terms of when these changes may start to happen? Well, in our 20s and 30s, really from a brain health standpoint, we're more or less at our peak. So you really actually reach your peak in terms of certain functions of the brain. So like memory, for example, you actually reach your peak ability to remember things around the age of 25, 30, and then it's actually downhill from there. But it's so slowly, progressively downhill that you don't really notice a lot of changes until you get much older. So at a younger age, we basically are all walking around doing quite well. Between 30 and the age of 60, we actually start to experience some of this age-related cognitive decline. So some of the things I mentioned where it may be harder to come up with the right word, it may be harder to remember the name of that individual, we start to experience those things after 30. By the time we get into our 60s, there are a number of us who will start to develop diseases of the brain, unfortunately. The biggest risk for developing diseases of the brain is just age. We'll talk about some of the other risk factors, but just simply growing older is the biggest risk factor developing some of these diseases of the brain. The thing that is interesting, though, is that even though some of us will begin to develop these diseases of the brain, we don't actually have significant symptoms. So we may start developing diseases of the brain in our 60s, but we're still going along kind of as business as usual. We may notice one or two rare things here and there, but by and far, we're doing okay. A lot of us ultimately will get to a point where we get mild cognitive impairment. This is essentially a state where we've developed changes in our thinking and our memory to the point where they're definitely noticeable. When we go to the doctor and talk about them and they do tests, they come up on the test. There's clearly something off with the test. But in this mild cognitive impairment state, we're still able to take care of ourselves. So that's the most important thing to keep in mind, is that we're still independent. Dementia is when we've had those changes in thinking and memory to the point where we can no longer take care of ourselves. We have to be taken care of by our children, or we have to be taken care of by a caretaker. And so there's a continuum, meaning it doesn't all happen overnight. You don't go from being completely normal to all of a sudden having dementia overnight. There's this very long continuum over the course of many, many years that often occurs in a situation where somebody develops disease of the brain and problems of the brain. And this is important to keep in mind because it has really important implications in terms of diagnosis, and ultimately it's going to have really important implications in terms of therapy also. So let's get into more of the nitty gritty. I've mentioned now a couple of times this idea of, well, there are diseases of the brain that can develop as we get older. What are actually some of these diseases of the brain that can develop? So first, just a picture. I truly believe a picture is worth 1,000 words. The brain here on the left is the brain of an individual who's passed away. They donated their brain to science. And so, we were able to, I didn't personally, but we were able to get a nice picture of the brain. This is a healthy looking brain. So this is how our brain should look. This is probably from an individual who may have died a little bit young just because of how good the brain looks. But you can see that the brain looks nice and plump. It's very full in different sections. The brain here on the right is the brain of an individual who most likely had Alzheimer's disease. So if you compare this brain on the right to the brain on the left, this one is much smaller overall. It almost looks like the back part of the brain is missing on the brain on the right. And that's because there's been so much shrinkage of the brain, okay? What causes this, we're going to talk about in just a little bit. But again, this is most likely the brain of someone who had Alzheimer's disease. So you can see with your own eyes, this is what happens when somebody has potentially a condition like Alzheimer's disease where the brain starts to shrink. Now, there are a lot of different types of disease of the brain. So some of these you may have heard before. Cerebrovascular disease or stroke. This is a very common disease of the brain. It's also a disease that's highly associated with age. So as we get older, many of us will develop cerebrovascular disease. There's what's called demyelinating disease. Some of us know individuals who have things like multiple sclerosis. This is a condition where the brain's immune system, or your body's immune system, actually attacks the brain and causes damage and can cause a large variety of symptoms. There are infectious diseases of the brain. So some of the ones that, we don't see as often, but we actually used to see relatively frequently, things like HIV, things like syphilis, those can actually all infect and cause damage within the brain itself. And then we're going to spend a lot of time this evening talking about the idea that there are neurodegenerative diseases. Now, that's just a fancy term meaning that the brain degenerates or basically breaks down over the course of time. And again, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about Alzheimer's, which is the most common neurodegenerative disease, but there are some others as well to keep in mind. So what is Alzheimer's? So I've at this point told you, there's dementia, there's the degenerative diseases. I haven't yet actually mentioned what Alzheimer's specifically is. So what I want to tell you is that Alzheimer's disease refers to a very specific process within the brain, okay? So it's different from dementia. Remember, dementia very specifically means that you've had changes in your thinking and your memory to the point where you can't take care of yourself independently anymore. That is purely what dementia means. Dementia can be caused by Alzheimer's. It can be caused by having a lot of strokes. It can be caused by having a really bad head trauma incident. You can have dementia for a lot of different reasons. It does not have to be just from Alzheimer's. Now, Alzheimer's disease itself, it specifically refers to just a buildup of things in the brain that shouldn't be there. What are those things? Well, it's two specific types of proteins, amyloid and tau. That is purely what Alzheimer's disease is. It's a buildup of amyloid and tau proteins in the brain in levels that they shouldn't be. This picture is just a cartoon graphic of what happens The reason that these proteins start to build up is because our brain has a really complicated system for how it kind of chops things up and digests them. So after our brain uses certain substances and whatnot, it'll chop them up and then kind of get rid of them so that they're not hanging around. In Alzheimer's disease, this process doesn't work any longer. So you have these different substances hanging around, but they're not getting chopped up appropriately. And what happens when they don't get chopped up appropriately and kind of gotten rid of? They start to clump together. And so these clumps are the basis of Alzheimer's disease, and they're really what cause the problems in Alzheimer's disease. The two pictures down here are actually, these are pictures on from a microscope. So this is brain tissue that has been basically processed, and somebody's looking at it under a microscope. And you can see these kind of dark circular items, these dark patches. These are actually the buildup of this amyloid protein within the brain itself. So we can actually see this on a microscope. This is just a different coloring for the same thing. So again, this is the amyloid protein that I talked about. Remember, I mentioned there's two proteins, amyloid and tau. Well, this is the tau protein and what it looks like. So again, this is essentially from somebody's brain. They're looking at a very small piece under the microscope, and these dark kind of triangular things, these are actually a buildup of the tau protein. Now, the reason this is so destructive is that all of the brain cells that normally talk to one another, when you get buildup of these amyloid and these tau collections, it stops the brain cells from talking to each other, and it creates basically a toxic environment where the brain cells will start to die and no longer function. And that's what causes the symptoms from Alzheimer's disease. The interesting thing is that, remember, I showed that color graph of kind of the continuum of disease. It was, green all the way up to the red. We know that people can start to develop Alzheimer's changes in the brain up to 20 years before they actually ever have symptoms. So there are individuals who are probably walking around right now who have Alzheimer's changes in the brain and don't have any sort of symptoms with regards to memory change or et cetera. And so again, just one more time to really reiterate it, this idea that Alzheimer's is not dementia, okay? Alzheimer's is a specific process of a buildup of things in the brain that shouldn't be there. You can be completely normal and have Alzheimer's disease. Your thinking, your memory can be completely normal and you can have Alzheimer's disease. Dementia is when your thinking and memory have gotten so bad that you can't take care of yourself anymore. You can have dementia and not have Alzheimer's disease, okay? There are a lot of different causes of dementia besides Alzheimer's disease. The million-dollar question, why? Why does this happen to some people and it doesn't happen to others? We've made headway into better understanding that, but we're still unfortunately a very far away from truly understanding why Alzheimer's or dementia happens to some people and doesn't happen to others. So there's a lot of ongoing work and a lot of ongoing research to try to better understand that. So why should we care? Why care about Alzheimer's and dementia at all? For some of this is a topic that hits very close to home. For some of us, it isn't. And I would like to maybe put forth that it is something that we should all be concerned about for a number of reasons. The first is it's incredibly common. So about 1 in 9 people over the age of 65 in this country actually have dementia that's caused by Alzheimer's disease. It is a tremendous number of people. By the time we get to 85, it's actually 1 in 3. So 1 in 3 people over the age of 85 actually has dementia caused by Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's and dementia is really costly. So if you look at the amount of money that people kind of would have paid for caregiving services last year, it was around $250 billion in unpaid caregiving, meaning specifically family members, friends, relatives, etc., people who were providing care but not actually getting paid for it. If you had to actually pay them money, you would have had to pay them basically over $250 billion just for taking care of folks with Alzheimer's and dementia last year alone. For those of us who have a personal experience, including myself, with Alzheimer's disease, it's incredibly hard on families. It's really difficult to see somebody slowly declining because of dementia. It's hard to see them go through job changes. It's hard to see them decline in terms of their emotional and mental health. It's really wearing and really taxing on the entire family, even though there's just one person who may be affected with the disease. The thing that I also want you to keep in mind is that we know through a lot of research that Alzheimer's and dementia don't play fair. They disproportionately affect our communities. African and American and Latino individuals have a 1.5 to 2 times higher risk of developing dementia compared to other groups. And unfortunately, Alzheimer's and dementia are going to get worse unless things change drastically. Many of us are aware that our population is aging significantly. And what we know is that there are currently about 6 million individuals who are age 65 and older who have dementia caused by Alzheimer's disease. In 40 years, by 2060, that number is going to more than double. So we're going to have almost 14 million people in this country who have dementia caused by Alzheimer's disease within the next 40 years. If you look at this picture also, so the different colors just represent the different age groups. The largest group that's going to grow over the next 40 years is the oldest of old. So individuals who are 80 plus. We are going to have a tremendous number of people who are age 80 plus walking around who have dementia related to Alzheimer's disease. So let's talk a little bit more about how Alzheimer's disease doesn't play fair and dementia don't play fair, meaning specifically they affect communities and groups of folks differently. So as I mentioned before, we know that Alzheimer's disease is more than 2 times as likely among African Americans and more than 1.5 times as likely among Latino individuals than other groups. Prevalence just means how many people currently in kind of the population have the disease. Incidence means how many people develop the disease over a period of time. So, over the course of the next 6 months, there will be a certain number of people who develop Alzheimer's. We know that the incidence is also the highest in the Black and brown community. So the number of people who are going to develop Alzheimer's in the future is also the highest in our communities. I think the most striking thing to realize is that we've known about this divide for decades. But if you look at how much progress have we actually made, in the last, this data is a little bit old, but it hasn't changed. Between 2000 and 2016, over 16 years, we did not narrow the gap at all. We didn't narrow the gap at all in terms of the disproportionate rates of Alzheimer's affecting the Black and brown communities. And again, as I mentioned, in the last 5 years, this data hasn't changed. So we have over 2 decades now where we know there are certain groups and certain populations that have a much higher risk and develop Alzheimer's and dementia much more frequently compared to others, and yet we haven't made a single dent in terms of trying to close the gap or improve it. This chart on the right here just shows how the number of individuals with Alzheimer's increases over time, and the different colors here just show different groups. So African Americans are in purple, so again, the highest group, unfortunately. Asian Americans are in the black here, the lowest group. And so you can see that across age groups too, there's disparities. There's a significant gap between different groups across all ages. So some of you may be thinking, okay, well, you're telling me that Alzheimer's and dementia disproportionately impact our community. Well, why? And the thing that's important to keep in mind is that they disproportionately impact certain communities because of the risk factors that disproportionately impact these communities. This is a slide showing that our risk factors for Alzheimer's and dementia span the entire life course. So that's one more thing I want you to keep in mind this evening is that Alzheimer's and dementia, it's not just a disease of old. The risk for developing Alzheimer's and dementia, it starts as soon as we're born. A little shocking, but we'll go through this. Let's kind of tease through one by one. So let's talk about early life. Let's talk about infancy and just birth. There was a research group that looked at individuals who were born in what's called a high stroke mortality state. So these are states like Georgia, Alabama, Oklahoma. Many of you have heard of what's called the stroke belt. It's a number of states along the southeastern US where there's really high rates of stroke in adults. What these folks found was that for individuals who are born in these high stroke risk states, there is a significant risk of developing Alzheimer's disease and cognitive issues, and specifically dementia. Specifically, there was almost a 10 times greater risk for African American folks who were born in these high stroke states compared to other groups. What about once you get a little bit older? So once you start going to school, early life schooling and education has a significant impact on our risk of Alzheimer's and dementia later on because it's protective. So the more school that we have under our belt, the more protective it actually is for our brain in the future. Again, this is from 2 research groups. What they found was that in early life education, so this is grade school, people in 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, etc. They found that there were already significant disparities in terms of early life education. So by the time our communities are even getting to school, there's already a big gap between other communities. What they found also was that individuals who had a lower quality of education, they had a much higher risk of dementia. So lower quality of education means things like not having enough teachers in the school, having overcrowded schooling, not having a full school year. So many schools in Black and brown communities don't actually even have a full school year. So all of these things play into basically having less of a quality education, essentially, in the long run. How about early life and childhood adversity? So many of us have to deal with things and go through things even at a young age that other communities and other folks don't. This was another group of folks who found that essentially those who had early life adverse events, they were more likely to have problems with regards to their thinking later on. They also found that there was a significant link between what's called socioeconomic status. That is just a fancy term for how much financial wealth and how many financial resources you have, essentially. They found that even in childhood, kids who come from families that have less kind of financial resources, they had a higher risk of having cognitive issues later on. So just in early life, we can see there's a huge gap in terms of risk factors for developing problems by the time we get to our 60s and 70s and 80s. Unfortunately, this doesn't stop. So by the time we get to midlife, what we run into is oftentimes we start to develop other medical problems. The biggest one that tends to affect the Black and brown communities are vascular issues. So as we get into middle age, we develop things like hypertension, diabetes, high cholesterol. All of these conditions are associated with an increased risk of dementia, unfortunately, and they disproportionately tend to affect our communities. I mentioned earlier that socioeconomic status, remember how much financial resources and how much financial wealth you have? In midlife, it's the same thing. If you have fewer financial resources, you have less wealth, you're still at higher risk for actually developing problems with your cognition and thinking later on. So by the time we actually get to a point where we're 60, 70, 80, some of us may be experiencing changes in our cognition, you may be thinking, well, it's too late at that point. The damage is already done. But I would challenge you and actually put forth that the damage can still be done, and you can actually leave damage for a future generation. And that's the thing I think that was kind of, a little bit scary to me in putting this together. So again, we know by the time we get to late age, all of the same things still apply. So our lack of access to financial resources, this stress we endured over the course of a lifetime, having to deal with racism and structural racism, all of those things increase your risk of having cognitive impairment. And then finally down here, this is a study that was done where they actually looked at individuals who had dementia and what happened in future generations. And what they found was that among African Americans specifically who had dementia, they depleted more than 90% of their family's wealth by the time they had passed away from dementia, compared to other groups where there was still a loss of the family's wealth, but it was more on the scale of 50 to 60%. So if you think about that, you work hard all of your life, you save money, you want to leave everything to your kids and your grandkids, you develop, something like dementia, and 90% of what you've saved up is just gone and you can't pass it on to other generations. And for many of us who, keep an eye on the socioeconomic kind of, disparities in this country, one of the biggest issues that we face as African American and Latino communities is the wealth discrepancy. There's a significant discrepancy in wealth between our communities and others. So knowing this, you would think, okay, you're telling me that there's a much higher rate of Alzheimer's and dementia in our communities. They're so damaging. Well, we must be getting to the doctor and being diagnosed with these problems. We must know what's going on. And unfortunately, it's more of the same in that we're not getting the care that we need either. So when you look at the comprehensiveness of evaluations for Alzheimer's and dementia, this information is from a research study that was done specifically in California. What they found was that, over here on the right, individuals who received kind of a fully comprehensive workup for Alzheimer's and dementia, only about a fourth of Medicare beneficiaries actually were diagnosed early on in the course of their disease. If you compare that to other groups, we actually find that rates of diagnosis at an earlier stage of impairment were much lower across the board, whether you were Latino, African American, or even Asian. And right below that, if you look at kind of how comprehensive the evaluations were, meaning there are very specific tests that we will, recommend to try to investigate into somebody's cognitive impairment. It's really 3 in general that we tend to recommend. If you look at, well, how many of these folks are actually even getting all 3 recommended tests, only about 1 in 10 folks who had Medicare received 1 in 3 tests, but that rate was even lower if you were not white. So only about 5% of Latinos and only about 2% of African American and Asian individuals who had Medicare received all of kind of the evaluation steps that we generally recommend. Again, that's from this kind of picture with the circles here on the right, which was a study done specifically in California of about 60,000 folks who had Medicare. Just some general trends too. We know that in low and middle income countries, rates of underdiagnosis reach 90%, meaning underdiagnosis essentially means you go to the doctor, you tell them, I'm really concerned about my memory, I've noticed changes. They take a look at you and they say, I think you're okay. That's essentially an underdiagnosis. They're missing the boat on what's really going on with your thinking and your memory. We know that also, this isn't just a problem in the US, even though, we have a lot of issues with regards to structural racism. We know that racial and ethnic minorities in other countries, Denmark, Norway, the UK, they're more likely to be underdiagnosed when it comes to their cognitive impairment. And as we mentioned, it kind of ties into here. We know that unfortunately our communities, by the time we actually get a diagnosis, oftentimes we're so far down the road with regards to the cognitive impairment that a lot of damage has already been done, and we're already in the midst of a crisis trying to take care of our loved ones. So how do we actually diagnose these conditions? And we'll get into also, well, why do we need to diagnose them? I'm hoping it's starting to become a little bit more clear that diagnosing these things earlier is better as opposed to later, but we'll talk a little bit more about why specifically. But how do we even get to a diagnosis? So I mentioned 3 real things that we recommend kind of across the board, plus or minus one other. Those 3 things are a very good neurological exam, neuropsychological testing, and then also brain imaging and blood tests. And then I mentioned kind of plus or minus some of these special tests. So what might you expect? You go to your doctor or you come to see a dementia specialist myself, what might you actually expect in terms of your evaluation? So first, the neurological exam. Many of us have had a very brief neurological exam done by our primary doctor. They have us do things like, follow their finger with our eyes and, try to walk like we're on a tightrope and, try to grab at certain things in a very coordinated fashion. They may tap on us to check our reflexes. All of those are components of a neurological exam. Really, the biggest component of a neurological exam is just talking with the doctor. So when I see folks in clinic, depending on, what they're concerned about, we may just talk for as much as honestly an hour, sometimes even longer than that. If somebody's really concerned or there's a lot of complicated issues, we'll just sit and talk and go through all of the information, because it's most important that you really are able to share what's going on with you. That's the really cornerstone of kind of a neurological exam. The next thing, as I mentioned, is neuropsychological testing. So what you might do in this, or what you might be asked to do in this, is essentially complete a paper and pencil kind of test where you may have to draw certain figures, you may have to copy certain figures, or you may do what's called a trail test, where you see a bunch of different numbers on a page and you have to kind of connect the dots, so to speak. You may do also some tests that cause you to really kind of do error monitoring and make sure you do things really precisely. So in this test here, what the person is supposed to do is they're actually supposed to state what the color of the letters are rather than actually reading the word. So for example, it's hard to see, but the color here is blue, but it says red. So the person is supposed to say essentially blue and not read the words on the page. All of these things require essentially very high levels of kind of cognitive function and require you to really, tax your brain and use your brain to the maximum extent possible. What about the third thing that I mentioned? So blood imaging and brain tests. So every evaluation for cognitive changes and memory changes should involve some level of picturing of the brain or imaging of the brain. The most common things that we do are essentially an MRI or a CAT scan of the brain. These look at really the brain structure. So they look to see if the brain is shrunken in certain areas. They look to see if somebody's had a stroke or damage to a certain area as well. There are some fancier tests that we actually can do as well. So there are very specialized CAT scans that are called amyloid and tau PET scans. And these are very useful in that we can actually visualize Alzheimer's pathology. So remember, if you rewind a little bit, we were talking about Alzheimer's disease as a buildup of this amyloid and this tau protein in the brain. We can actually see these changes while somebody's alive in one of these special scanners. So we actually have this technology available. And then there's blood tests that we order. So anytime somebody has changes in their thinking and memory, there's always a lot of things that could potentially be contributing. There are things like vitamin deficiencies, if your thyroid is off, if you have an infection, all of these things we have to look into and make sure that we rule out. There are some new blood tests that are also coming out that are actually being used to detect these amyloid and these tau proteins in the blood, even though they're actually within the brain themselves also. So really a lot of tests at our disposal to be able to figure out what is going on within the brain and why are there changes in thinking and memory. As I mentioned, I'm hoping by this time you're starting to kind of, grasp that, okay, I don't want to be in the group that figures out what's going on too late. I want to kind of know earlier. And hopefully this picture drives it home. And really, the earlier we can diagnose somebody with these problems, the earlier we can start treating them and the less severe, hopefully, we can make symptoms. Now, there's some caveats to this that we can get into, and I'm sure are going to come up in the questions. But by and far, the earlier we can figure out what is going on that's causing somebody's changes in thinking and memory, the better we can plan and the better we can start therapy. If we get to the point where you already have pretty severe problems in your thinking and your memory, even if we try treating at that point, the damage has been done to a large extent. We can't bring you back. We don't have therapies as of yet that can actually reverse the damage. We haven't gotten that far. Once we lose the brain cells, they're kind of gone forever, unfortunately. And so the earlier we can get in and start managing things, the better off you're going to be. And so if there's nothing else that you take from this evening, I just want you to keep in mind, if you're concerned about your thinking or memory, or someone who's concerned or thinking about their thinking and memory, you've got to go and talk with your doctor and get evaluated. We'll provide our contact information also, and we can happy to help anyone who may be in the situation. But if you're concerned, you got to talk about it. You can't ignore it. So there has been a lot that has changed within just the last 6 months in the world of Alzheimer's and dementia. There's a very controversial medication that received FDA approval in June of this past year. So in the midst of the pandemic, this was all going on underneath the surface. We had the first Alzheimer's drug approved in basically almost 20 years. It's a medicine called Adjacenmab. Now, what it does specifically is that Adjacenmab, it takes away one of the proteins that builds up in the brain in Alzheimer's, specifically the amyloid protein. So the two pictures here, the one on the left is from an individual who has Alzheimer's disease, who has no treatment. They're just allowed to basically progress. And then the picture on the right is this same individual after a year of treatment with the Adjacenmab. The areas in red here, this is all amyloid protein from Alzheimer's. So this drug in this individual after a year completely pulled out a tremendous amount of the amyloid protein from the brain. Now the question is, okay, you're taking away this amyloid protein. What are you actually doing to someone's thinking and memory? And that's why this drug is controversial. It's because it's still a bit of a gray area. So we're still learning about the drug and what it truly does from a standpoint of, does it actually help your thinking and memory? There's one thing that I think is kind of resoundingly true at this point. It's that giving this drug to people who are further along the road, it's not helping. So again, this idea of, if you are caught early, if you recognize there's something going on early, we can do something. This drug, if we give it later on, it's not going to help you. There are other drugs that are coming out that are very similar to this, and it's not going to take probably very long for them to actually be on the market. They're all going to operate in the same fashion. If you catch it early, you give the drug early, you can prevent things from getting worse. If you catch it late and give the drug late, all bets are off. You're not going to be able to really help someone. So I realize that the information I presented, a lot of it is maybe a little bit bleak, but I want to leave with you that there are a lot of things you can do right now for your brain health. You can literally start them this evening. Some of these things you may actually even be doing already, and it may be just a matter of kind of making them even more kind of a part of daily life. So in terms of keeping our brain healthy, there's an intersection between a lot of different things. So there are a couple of areas in which we can pick and choose to really optimize to help our brain health. So the first is this idea of improving what's called cognitive reserve. So all of us have cognitive reserve. Cognitive reserve is just a fancy term for kind of your brain's toughness. So as we develop changes as we age, as I mentioned, as we develop things like Alzheimer's disease, we have a stroke, head trauma, et cetera, our brain is resilient. Our brain is tough. So even though we may be having changes in the brain that are consistent with Alzheimer's, because the brain is tough, it can hang in there. So you can keep doing what you need to do day in, day out. This is basically what cognitive reserve does. So there's ways specifically to kind of improve that, okay? The other things we can do, we can reduce the amount of brain inflammation that's going on. Many of us are cognizant of the fact that inflammation has been a pretty hot topic, not just in brain health, but across the board in medicine. We know that having ongoing levels of inflammation in our brain is just bad. It's just bad news across the board. It's bad for things like your pancreas and can lead to diabetes. It's bad for things like your heart and can lead to heart disease. It's bad for things like your brain and can lead to Alzheimer's and dementia. Having high levels of inflammation is not good. And so there are things we can do specifically to reduce the amount of brain inflammation that we have too. And then finally, there's the idea that we can reduce the amount of stress or physiologic damage that's done to the brain. And this can be brought about in specific ways too. So what are some of those ways? The first and foremost, this is going to be more powerful than any pill. This is going to be more powerful than any puzzle you do. It's going to be your new best friend for your brain health in 2022. It's getting physically active. There is a tremendous amount of research that has been done looking at what is the link between physical activity and brain health. And what we know overwhelmingly is that people who are physically active have much better brain health and much better physical health overall. These charts are from a study that was done on 299 adults who were over the age of 65. They followed these individuals for 9 years. And over that time period, they did MRIs of their brain. So they took repeated pictures of their brain, they gave them memory tests, and then they had them walk a certain number of blocks each week. What they found was that having somebody walk around 4 miles each week not only helped preserve brain function, it actually grew certain parts of the brain. So that's what you're seeing, all of these green arrows kind of increasing in size. This is the brain actually increasing in size over the course of time in different parts of the brain. So the hippocampal area, which is important for memory, the motor area, which is important for movement, the precentral gyrus, which is important for movement as well. All of these areas actually increased in size over the course of time that these individuals were participating in this regular walking. So not only can you help preserve your brain function, you can actually grow your brain by doing some physical exercise. What do you need to do in terms of exercise? So what specifically? Really, you want to go after what's called aerobic exercise. Aerobic exercise is anything that gets the heart rate elevated and keeps it sustained for a long period of time. So what does that look like? Brisk walking, gardening, chores, playing with the grandkids or the kids, taking the pets out for a walk, carrying something heavy, anything that you feel like gets your heart rate elevated and then keeps it elevated for a period of time. That's what you really want to go for. We generally recommend folks try to participate in about 150 minutes per week. So if you think about it, it's 5 times a week, 30 minutes each time, or something like 3 times a week, 50 minutes each time. You can break it up kind of however you want, but it's important just to hit around 150 minutes. You probably don't want to do it all at once either. You want to spread it out a little bit. If you're really up for it, you can do more vigorous things. You can speed walk. You can walk up and down some of the hills that we have here in San Francisco, bike riding, swimming, dancing. All of these things are going to get your heart rate up and keep it elevated. So you really want to help your brain out this evening, get moving, start right away. What else can you do? Well, eat right, okay? We know that the food that we take in really provides our brain with everything it needs. Our brain runs predominantly on sugar. So all of the things basically that we take in, when it's all broken down and all is said and done, our brain is primarily fueled by sugar. Now, don't go out and start eating tons of candy and cookies. That's not going to help your brain. You're actually just going to get diabetes and other problems. But by keeping a balanced diet, you can actually optimize how your brain is really using the foods that you're taking in. And ultimately, what your brain is doing is it's converting these foods to energy and it's converting them to matter as well. So what you eat has a significant impact on your brain health. We generally recommend what's called a Mediterranean diet. You can also eat what's called the MIND diet. Basically, all of these diets at their base are very high and very rich in fruits, vegetables, healthy oils like olive oil, beans, and then lean meats like fish, chicken, and really trying to limit things like butter, cheese, fried foods, sweets. You try to stay away from those things. So if you Google MIND diet or Mediterranean diet, you can find more kind of graphics like this, but really it's just a diet that's very rich in all the good stuff that we should be eating that your doctor probably has told you about already. Okay, couple of other things, 2 other things specifically, keeping your mind active. So we know that if we keep our mind active, our neurons are really the powerhouse cells of the brain. They do all of the work. They can stay active and healthy and increase kind of this resilience and help us fight off diseases of the brain. How do you keep your mind active? Read, play puzzles, socialize with your neighbor, learn something new. Anything that is not sitting on the couch watching the TV or watching the world go by. You want to avoid that at all costs. The more sedentary you are, where you're just kind of sitting and watching TV and not really doing much, the worse that is for your brain health. Now, with all things that we're talking about, moderation is key. So I'm not going to tell you you can never watch television again. That's not realistic. I'm not going to tell you you can never eat a cookie or a piece of cake again. That's not realistic. But it's about moderation. If you've noticed that, hey, I have some of these habits, some of these less than ideal brain health habits in terms of I watch a little bit too much TV. I'm not really very active. I don't socialize a lot. Now is the time to really think about changing some of those things. And I mentioned it already, but really socializing more. So we as human beings are very social creatures. It's really important that we have regular socialization. And we know that socialization is important for brain health in addition to just general health. This is a study that was done actually not on something brain health related, but actually on the common cold. What the researchers did was they looked at people who characterized themselves as kind of less social versus very social. And then they looked at how often they got sick. And what they found was that we'll be talking about essentially the Jackson criteria here. What they found was that people who characterize themselves as, I'm pretty much a social butterfly. I really have a lot of friends. I like to talk. They got the common cold much less frequently than people who basically said, yeah, I'm more isolated, more of kind of a lone wolf. I don't really like to socialize as much. So you being engaged with other folks can actually help improve your immune system and your brain health as well. Now, be mindful that we are still in a pandemic, obviously. Don't go out and start talking randomly with people on the street with no mask. But in all seriousness, you want to make sure you're building that social network and keeping it strong. Your brain will definitely thank you in the future. I'm going to turn it over to Ashley, my close colleague, to talk a little bit about kind of the specific work that we're doing here through UCSF, but truly grateful to each and every one of you for your attention. And thank you so much.
Great information. I had a lot of questions, but I'll wait to the end as we get through it. But Ashley, you're up. Go ahead and pull up your slides and get through that one.
Thank you. All right. So hi. Thank you again for having us. It's really, really wonderful to be here. All right, so we have our outreach program at the UCSF Memory and Aging Center. And so essentially this program serves several neighborhoods in San Francisco. And aside from our English-speaking cohorts, we have other various cohorts such as, our Spanish-speaking cohorts and our Mandarin and Cantonese-speaking cohorts. All right. Okay, so in order to serve communities, we really want to help our communities, and we do this by recruiting socially vulnerable people and who are at risk in our communities, people who have various cultural diversities and backgrounds, and that really just need the extra assistance in our help. And so some of our pillars in our community outreach program is brain health education. And so if you have education on how to improve your brain health, you're more likely to have a significant improvement in your life. We have community-based satellite clinics where we come out to you in a community. We provide healthcare and give you brain health evaluations. We also have arts and activity-based workshops for brain health, and this stimulates cognitive health within the brain. We also hold, social media engagements along with other group activities on a virtual platform, which help to break down the barriers of isolation. Okay. So here is our African American outreach team members, along with our contact information. So please write this information down, take a picture or screenshot. We really want to hear from you. If you have loved ones, or if yourself you're concerned about cognitive health, or if you have memory issues, we really want to hear from you. Okay. So within each city, there are vulnerable areas, right? So within this map of San Francisco, those particular neighborhoods are highlighted in red. Oftentimes, these areas are most likely inhabited by minorities, Black and Brown people. And they're also socially economic vulnerable areas, which is oftentimes a reflection of systematic racism. And within these communities, those are the ones who, and we, myself included, we are the ones who suffer the most from systemic racism. And people who live in these areas are likely to have a harder time getting access to adequate healthcare, higher education, stable jobs, stimulation of generational wealth, and things of that nature. So these are the areas in San Francisco that our team really want to reach out to inform, and also in the Bay Area in general. And so we really value our community relationships and partnerships within these communities. And we also just want to provide better healthcare and other resources. So to give you an idea of some of the activities and community engagements that we have done this past year, we'll start with bingo. We have a virtual bingo games partnered with the Dr. George Davis Center in the Bayview neighborhood, and it's really wonderful for cognitive stimulation. And as previously discussed in the previous lecture by Dr. Winden, and it's really our own little community. We engage with one another, we socialize, listen to music while also winning bingo. Another activity that we provide through Creative Minds that was developed by one of our Atlantic fellows is called the Neurons education activities. So within our first workshop, we learned about COVID-19 in the brain, and we also made a hand sanitizer. In the second workshop, we identified hazardous home products, which sometimes we aren't aware of, and we don't know that they're as toxic as they are. And so within that class, we made some non-toxic disinfectant spray. Our third class, we focused on wellness in the brain and the importance of mental health. And so within that class, we also made some salt scrubs and discussed the important benefits of exfoliation of the skin. We also had some photography classes with one of our professional photographers, Alex Kornhuber, as well as other brain health educational lectures. And so we really want to engage in the community and collaborate with activities. So we've also had an in-person event that's socially distanced, held outside with tons of airflow and PPE, the protective gear. During that time period, we held like Zumba classes and planted a brain cactus to remind people that, think of every time you look at that cactus, think about how important your brain is, and various activities such as, painting pumpkins and building stethoscopes. And so all of these activities were coupled with brain health lectures, and they really go hand in hand with one another. And so moving on. So here are a couple activities, exercising of the outdoors events that we had. Here are some of the platforms that we had online with some of our participants. And so with that, I'd like to give a special thank you to all of our community members and supporters. And here's also along with myself and Dr. Winden is Michael Bennett, who's been a wonderful help with our community engagements. And so lastly, I just want to put this back up here. Here is our contact information again. We really want to hear from you. If you have a center and want to collaborate or bring us in to really engage and go through some of these activities together, we would love to hear from you. Please, please, please let us know. And we really have a strong heart for improving and encouraging healthy lifestyles, and which ultimately improves the quality of life within our communities. So thank you.
Great information. Glad that you all were able to come on tonight and really break down some important health concerns in our community. I have a number of questions that I would like to ask. I know some of the community asked questions where I think the doc went over. I know they was asking about the food and exercise. So you kind of went through that. One of the other ones was the preventive measures that we could take in our community, which you went over that. But I think one of the things that I really want to hone in on, when you talk about the socioeconomical issues that impact the Black and Brown community, with finances being tied, inflation up, the medical mistrust in the community, a number of issues that we already face, right? And we talk about how do we bring these services to our community. I think we're getting down the right path of what we need to do. And on your chart, you were showing that from 30 years old to older is when the concern is there. And sometimes in our community, getting the 30-year-olds, 25 to 30-year-olds to get services is sometimes a challenge. Knowing the information that we know about the disparities and the financial issues that impact the community, from a health standpoint, how do we get that to the forefront? When you put out the maps of Bayview, District 10, these areas that are impacted, how do we get these services to the community so that they can assess them? Because right now, it's hard to get those services. I've seen you out in the community, Dr. Winden. I know you are doing a lot to try to get community impacted, but I'm looking at if we need to be targeting these folks younger, how do we put these plans together where we get the MRI screening or the blood testing in the community? How do we get more of those services to make people more comfortable to break down? Because it's one thing that we always see on all of the topics when we talk about Black issues related to health and everything else. We always, at the lowest or the highly affected, but we really don't see the preventative measures in place to really attack this. So from a health standpoint, from a health system standpoint, how do we actually impact the community?
Sure. No, I think that's an incredibly important question, John. And, the way I think about it is it's really, it's a team effort in my mind. And I think the first and foremost thing that's important to kind of put forth is the shortcomings of the medical community, and so I haven't, been in, I've been in training for a very long period of time, but I apologize in all honesty on behalf of the medical community half the time when I speak with folks, because the medical community has just failed many, many communities in this world, in the US specifically. We don't spend enough time with patients. We don't basically go, out of our way to truly help people. There are issues with systemic racism, unconscious bias. There are tremendous problems with our health system. And so I think the first and foremost important thing is that medical health providers acknowledge that this is going on. And once acknowledging it, not stopping there, but actually deciding, okay, well, what can I actually do to make a difference? And so this is, in my mind, where the partnership comes in, is because there are individuals, I'm one of few, there are individuals like myself where this is our heart. This is really where our heart lies, but we can't do this alone. I can't correct disparities without help from members in the community like yourself, who are willing to, be vocal about what's going on in the community in terms of we're not getting services. I can't stand, this medical facility because of the doctors there, I was mistreated, or this happened. We have to have individuals who are vocal, who are able to help us in this regard. Many of us, I think the way we're also figuring out how to kind of navigate this is from that team-based approach also is really leveraging things that we maybe haven't thought of before. So I think social media holds actually a lot of power in this regard. If you look at non-medical issues that have occurred over the course of the last 2 years and what social media has done in terms of the power it holds, it's tremendous. It's far beyond many of the avenues that we've traditionally used in terms of getting the needle to actually move. So, one of the things I would just, beg of everyone on this podcast this evening is to be vocal, continue to voice your opinions, continue to show up, continue to show out. If there are opportunities to engage, if you have questions, please continue to be active. And I acknowledge and understand that it's tiring. It's hard to do this work. It's hard to be an advocate for yourself nonstop. But I think in addition with that work with, individuals like myself, we can start to make a difference and move the needle ultimately.
Wow. Yeah, that's very powerful. A couple of weeks ago before the end of the year, we had a Sunday conversations with doulas and midwives. And it seems like that call to action is what's needed to have more liaisons, to have more people that can advocate for the patients in the community, to deal with the medical professionals. I think that's just something that we really have to start thinking about. We had so many comments that had came in on that conversation about we need, doulas just for regular women's health. And being able to have those folks that can communicate on the professional realm as well as into the community. But that's what next Friday is all about. There's a number of issues that are impacting Black folks in San Francisco, but across the country, but it's happening in San Francisco. And I think that's another way folks are going to be able to come and talk about some of the issues that are impacting us in our community. But we also need to have those folks who have that control and have that power to make the change be open, right? And it's all about coming to the table and meeting and really being strategic and intentional with the planning and how do we attack what's going on in our community. And one of the things that keeps coming up, and I just want to hear from you all on it, is this ideal of Western medicine versus Eastern medicine. Because I get a lot of people that call me back and say, John, they always talking about the difference between African American and Asians. Well, in the Asian community, they do more Eastern and herbals and things of that nature. Is it starting to come to a point in the medical realm that we have to start in America looking at a different way when we come to medicine and how we treat patients and you know, not only just during COVID. I mean, it is very difficult to get into a physician and get the time to do the checkouts. And I saw the slide up where, you know, you're doing these neurological tests at these appointments, but you know, it is so hard to get in there and get that time with the doctor. And I mean, I've, you know, don't even want to say the organization name, but you go to these appointments and it's really, you know, for me, when I was growing up as a young man, when we went to the doctor, it was more hand on hand, you know, checking the patient out. Right now, you know, you go to the doctor, you say this is wrong, and the doctor saying, hey, I'm gonna give you this prescription, try this. If this works, all right, everything is good. If it don't, come back, we'll try something else. And I don't understand you know, that type of practicing, but that's what's happening a lot of time. When I talk to people in the community, that's the same feedback that I'm getting from them. It's like, hey, I called my doctor, I told them I had this, they gave me, they didn't even check me. So are we getting to a point in the medical realm where we really have to be open to different type of medicine, Eastern teachings, or just some of the natural stuff? You know, in the Asian community, they do a lot of herbs. And I know in the Black community, there's a lot of herbs and different things that folks, you know, utilize. I mean, how close are we getting there? Or is that something that we need to really look at? Because in our community, there's a lot of cultural stuff that holds us up. But how do we like transition and we find that happy medium when it comes to, you know, this modern day medicine?
Sure. Yeah. So there's two things I want to kind of tease out and speak with. And the first is, you know, what you mentioned about our medical system. You know, our medical system is really, it's in dire straits at this point. So the issue with seeing your primary care doctor and you know, I'll kind of maybe present it from the flip side in terms of what they're dealing with. So for somebody to manage basically and run kind of a primary care practice. So say I'm a family doc, you know, I want to take care of folks, want to see folks, just to be able to make kind of the bottom line, meaning, you know, I have enough basically coming in to pay the staff, to pay for all the lab tests, to pay for, you know, everything. I have to see maybe 60 people in one day. If you think about that, if I have to see 60 people in one day, how much time can I really spend with any one person? I mean, you're talking about like shaving it down to, okay, I have 8 minutes with you. That's not realistic. It's really not for healthcare. But the problem is that it's not the doctors choosing to do it. It's the medical system forcing them into this box. And the problem is that until from a political side, we can start to change that, we're not going to make a lot of headway. You know, we have to get the politicians and others to stop treating medicine like a business. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be a business dealing with someone's health. That's obscene. You know, how much money I can make off somebody taking care. That's absolutely absurd. But that's what this country has done when it comes to healthcare. And it's criminal in my opinion. But the way we change that is by advocating and being vocal and getting to the politicians and the top levels who set the laws, that when the laws are put in place, the fall down and trickle down from all this basically comes out in, well, I have 10 minutes for you because of all the issues I have to deal with. So that's the first thing. We have to go after the system. The system is not working, and we can change it. As people, as physicians, we can do it, but we have to just keep at it. The other question, the other point I want to talk about is the idea of kind of natural medicine. So there's two things I want everyone to kind of keep in mind. There's two things I want to leave you all with this evening. So in terms of supplements that we can get over the counter, the supplements we can get in health food store here in the US, there's two things about the supplements. The first is that none of the supplements that are produced here are regulated by the FDA. So the FDA is the Food and Drug Administration. What the Food and Drug Administration does is that they look at medicines, among a lot of other things, but let's talk specifically about medicines. They look at medicines and they basically hold fire to the company's feet in terms of what is it that's actually in the medicine? Does the medicine actually work? Is it actually safe? You have to get what's called FDA approval for any medication you come out with. So it has to jump through all of these hoops for it to actually get into the market. Taking a supplement over the counter, none of that is regulated by the FDA. Now, the problem with that is that a couple of things. One, you could be taking a supplement that has things in it that you didn't bargain for or you don't want in your system. So there was a scandal that happened, this was some time ago, where a lot of the fat burners that people were taking, they came under fire because what they had in them was thyroid hormone. They had actually natural thyroid, not natural, but it's called exogenous, meaning just out of the body. They had thyroid hormone that people were taking, which was helping them lose tremendous amounts of weight, but it was destroying their own thyroid's function and their own thyroid's ability to operate. So taking some of these natural things, you may be putting something into your system that you don't really want. If you get your supplements from out of country also, some of the manufacturing is even less stringent for those supplements. So you could end up with things like lead or heavy metals in the supplements that, again, you don't want to take. A lot of these things are carcinogenic, meaning they can cause cancer and cause other problems as well. Okay. So you have to be a little bit careful with kind of the supplements and the idea that, well, this one herbal pill is going to prevent everything. I would say what separates what we do in this country in terms of prevention from others is if you look at everything else. So if you look at many Asian cultures, sure, they take herbal supplements, but look at how they live and what they eat. Look at what they eat in particular. Look at the fact that some of them, because they don't have access to cars and whatnot, they walk everywhere. There's a tremendous amount of nutritional prevention. There's a tremendous amount of physical exercise that goes into it. And we oftentimes don't think of those things, but truth be told, those are far more powerful than any pill or any supplement that you're going to take in the long run. And so I would say that if you're going to look at the idea of prevention, you have to look at it from a comprehensive standpoint. If you're going to compare cultures and whatnot, you have to look at across the board what a culture may be doing, one compared to the other, to get to this idea of prevention. Prevention is the gold standard ultimately. Regardless of how good we get ultimately with regards to treating and whatnot, if you can prevent people from getting the disease to begin with, it's far more cost effective and you can help a lot more people. So prevention is ultimately the gold standard. It's just how are we going to get there?
Wow, great information. I think that's a good call to action. And I think that's something that as community leaders, community organizations, that we need to continue to talk about because we do have a big problem with the insurance industry because we know the insurance is driving a lot of policies here in the Capitol and as well as, in Washington. And I think that's a big problem that we have to deal with because insurance companies play a big role in how these policies affect our day-to-day health. But since we're on the topic of brain and Alzheimer's, when you're talking about the trauma to the brain and in our community, folks in the community deal with so much trauma. And I think when we think about, I like how you broke that down because we think always like physical trauma, something happened to us, but the mental trauma impact, the violence in our community, the trauma from, just living in a community with food deserts and security issues and things of that nature, it's so important to get this testing done ahead of time and for our community. And when we talk about food, all these things just kind of play a part of what's really impacting us. In other communities, they don't have those issues, but just in the Bayview, in District 10, in some of these heavily populated areas that we're talking about that need the service or need the support, there's no food. The quality of food is not there. So this issues of the disparities we talk about, it hits us in so many ways. The environment, we dealing with the asthma, the radioactive materials that we are fighting in the community. Because when you talked about that brain stroke, that line or whatever, it just made me think about how much our environments in these communities that we're talking about impacts us every day. And it's amazing that the numbers aren't higher. But again, that whole loop of how we fix things, and it starts with the environment, it starts with our food, and the testing. But having a family fit day is something that we want to put together, because I think it is needed in our community. COVID has isolated us in the house. People are not moving as much. People are not doing the activities. But with that being said, in our environments, how do we, from your perspective and just the work you see, especially in District 10, with all of the environmental issues, the food and health issues that we deal with, that number is going to increase with our young folks in that community. What can we put in place, soon enough to get this type of testing? Is it realistic to do the blood testing, or is it realistic to do the scanning, or how do we bring those services to make it affordable? Because I know some people say, well, my insurance don't cover this, right? The biggest thing is, if I go in there in Medicare, are they going to let me go and do a CT scan, right? Is it cost effective, or is the blood test the effective way to go? How do we do that to find out that support that's needed in our community?
Sure. Yeah. So I would say, I think the way to tackle that is, to go for, there's this phrase, kind of low hanging fruit, which is the things that are kind of more easily accessible that you can, grab a hold to. I think going after those to begin with, that's the way that we're going to maybe start to crack the door open. So there are things that, your doctor, for example, can give you just in the clinic. Some of the tests I talked about, the neuropsychological testing, some of those kind of screening tests, you can take those in a doctor's visit. It takes all of maybe 5-10 minutes. So you could schedule a doctor's visit where all you do is just come in and take that test and talk about it. That way you have it on record. Because one of the difficult things that we, find is that people come in, like I said, when they're late. We don't know where they started. We don't know when things started changing. We just get a pile of information about just the here and now. And it's like, well, what happened the last 7-8 years when you were still functioning well? So I think when you can get just somewhere in your chart, somewhere in your record, some basic things, a good neurological exam, getting something like just a basic screening test in, those help in terms of just starting to slowly build along the information. Getting the brain scans and things like that, that is tougher, especially because of insurance. We didn't spend time talking about this, but one of the ways you can get some of those tests actually is through participation in things like observational research. So there are a lot of research projects where they will give you a free MRI of the brain and actually give you this free testing and give you free blood testing. You just have to agree to participate in the study. Most of these studies, it's not giving you a treatment. They don't give you an experimental drug. They don't zap your head or anything like that. They literally give you the test that your doctor would give you if you actually had, a significant memory problem. And it's basically just your agreement that you're participating in a study. So that's one way actually where, especially if you're maybe on the younger side and you want to have a pretty comprehensive evaluation, but you're running into insurance issues and whatnot, you can use the research studies that are going on to get a lot of those things done essentially for no cost at all. Some of the research studies, they'll actually pay you to do these things, to get a brain scan and things like that. And then you have that information moving forward so that, say 15 years after you do a research study, you have some problems, you always have kind of this baseline when things were going well. So that's one of the other ways that, you can potentially get around things. There are some folks that I work with where we're trying to really bring services to the community specifically and really get around the cost issue. So I actually volunteer and see patients for free and do dementia evaluations for free in the Department of Public Health system. I know other folks who I work with who do that as well. So there's a growing number of us who are trying to basically bring services free of cost to the community. It's just we're small in number is the problem, and we're trying to grow though.
Yeah, I'd like to add on to that just a little bit. So that's also why we really want to express the importance of research. And, specifically, Dr. Winden and myself, we work at the UCSF Memory and Aging Center, where we do these evaluations and gather data from these research visits. And so one thing that I really just want to point out is that a lot of times when you have research, there's a majority of these these research participants are essentially white, European background, and so whenever new drugs and stuff are developed, they're essentially based off of the people who sign up, right? So if we have drugs that are modified specifically, to a certain group, I feel as if it's really important to have more minorities to sign up on research, so you get like a broader picture of various things of how it impacts our body. Right. So just to throw it out there again, our information is out there. Please contact us. We'd really love to talk to you.
Wow, great information. I think it's very important, and I'm doing my part to connect with some of the folks at UCSF. I am part of the UCSF family and trying to make sure, because, on Parnassus, you see all of the research stuff in the elevator postings, but it's not getting out to the community. A lot of these trials and stuff that they have, and you're right, some of them are paid. But again, getting that information out to the community, and that's what we want to utilize our platform to get these studies and that information out there so that we can get participants from the community get involved. But definitely, I would love to see, a day that maybe the neuroscience or some of the folks could do something just for the community, to have a day where they could just come in and maybe we get 300 or 400 participants just to come in and do testing. I think that's something that we really need to have. I think I need to go. I'll be forgetting stuff all the time. I think it might be happening to me. So I got to go out there and get checked because I can't remember stuff. I can't remember numbers from yesterday. So I might have to go down there and get tested as well. Sometimes I can't remember the guests that I have on. So, I might have to get checked out as well. But taking the lead, just sometimes in our community, for whatever reason, they have to see people who look like them moving and doing it. And that's why I'm always trying to be on the forefront, leading the community, right? Because again, I understand, behind the scenes, the importance of research, getting information that impacts us. And it is challenging, dealing with our folks. Sometimes it's hard to get them to come out the house and participate, but really being intentional on figuring out how that we can, get folks involved and to do it. And I think it starts with these events. When we have an opportunity, we have these events like our bowling event and things of that nature, getting folks to table up and start getting this information out to the community, because that's just what it is, and it's like, we have to start doing this very, very important information if we want to break down some of these issues that impact us. It starts with prevention. And I think too many times in the Black community, it's more reactive in all areas. It's not just in the medical. When we talk about violence prevention, everything, everybody's reacting to what's going on. And we really have to shift. And I'm hoping in 2022, this is something that our communities will do, is really get into the preventive modes, finding out what we can do pre. And one of the things that I would like to see, and maybe we could work together on this, Doc and Ashley, is, getting a list together. I had some guests on here last year that talked about this. And when we talk about advocating for our community folks, sometimes for whatever reason, our community can speak up for everything else, but when it comes to doctors, when it comes to police, we just go numb. We just don't speak, or we don't know how to advocate for ourselves. But I would like to put together, and I've been asking folks, for males and females, a real ask list for patients, for our Black and brown folks of the community, right, to really know what to go in there and ask our doctors. Because again, these type of tests that you're asking is very important, but realistically, how many people are going to go into the doctor and say, hey, I need to get a health screening of my brain for dementia or Alzheimer's, right? That's like very slim to somebody asking for that, right? But if we know that this window of impact is 30 to 40, just like we do for colon cancer, just like we do for any other checks, that colonoscopy that people have to check at 50, how do we put something together and say, hey, you know what, Black male, Black woman of the community at 30, I want you to ask your doctor to do a test on X, Y, and Z when they draw your blood, right? And that's being more intentional and making people think, because sometimes we have these appointments and we just go in there, okay, everything is fine, and we're not really getting the right things that we're checking. Right. So I talked to somebody, and I think somebody just put up here a resource book, but I want something more specific, right? Because when we talk about Black health, and we're talking about brown health, and we're talking about the issues that impact us the most, how do we get these things in a formidable way that we can really attack to make sure that we're intentional when we going into these doctors who don't look like us, don't understand our struggles, and we're just afraid to just speak up, right? Because I've been a caretaker for people taking the doctor, and sometimes I had to tell them, stop telling the doctor, just tell them the truth, right? So, because that's the thing, we get around people and then we don't want to tell what we're really doing. You know, you smoking 3 times a week, you're drinking, right? But they get to the doctor and say, oh no, I only drink once a month. It's like, see, but because we have that issue in our community, right? And we just being real here. And this is one thing about both sides of the conversation. This is our space, and we always want to be truthful and honest. But I really think it is coming to a point in our community we really need to have, like we get a service check for our cars, right? You know, you go in there, the car has at 30,000 miles, you got to change the transmission fluid, you got to do all this stuff. Where is the black maintenance chart at, right? And that's what I really want to see happen in 2022. All of our medical professionals, I've been asking, how do we put something together and say, hey, if you're 25 to 30, when you go talk to your doctor, I think we had a show last in October about breast cancer, right? And a lot of these young ladies didn't even know, oh, this doesn't affect me. And the lady's like, no, these are when you need to go, right? So it's like, how do we put something together to say, hey, if you're a young black or Latin woman or a brown woman at 25 to 30, we want you to go to your doctor and ask them to check X, Y, and Z. Okay, when you're 30 to 40, we want you to check X, Y, Z. I think that would be help, like a health guide or some kind of black and brown checkpoint that we can really hand to our community. Say, when you go to the doctor, ask them to do this for you, so we can get ahead of the curve.
Yeah, and even before we get there, right? We have to be honest with ourselves. We have to, before it gets to the bad point. I feel like a lot of times within our community, we don't really go to the doctor unless there's something wrong, right? So, and that kind of defeats the purpose of living a healthy lifestyle. You want to help yourself. We want to help you help yourself, essentially, right? Like it's you have to be an advocate for yourself. And so in order to do that, you have to be honest with yourself. Okay, like, where am I? Should I be exercising more? Should I be walking more? Should I be not sitting as long as I have been every single day on these Zoom calls, or, while we're locked in the house during this quarantine? We really need to just advocate. You know what? Get up, walk around your house. So if you're brushing your teeth, go ahead, walk around the house, get those steps in. It's really important to advocate for yourself. So then when you're in the doctor's office and you're sitting across from someone who may or may not look like you, and you worry about, do they believe me when I tell them I have this ailment? Do they believe me when I say, oh, I have this thing going on? Like, we want to be heard, right? So in order to express ourselves, we really have to listen to our own body and our own self before we can adequately express that to others. So advocacy, prevention is super important.
Yeah, wow. And thank you all, for coming on here, because I really believe in hearing both sides of the conversation. This is the pathway to that healing process. It takes communication. It takes seeing people like us to start bridging that gap. And again, the medical professionals, they have been missing from the community. There's a number of folks, and I have to give UCSF credit, because during COVID, they were really out in the community and seeing, and there was a number of other healthcare providers that wasn't. Now they're trying to come around to connect. But, it's also frustrating, because it's like, now it's the same thing, right? Because things are getting worse. Now they want to tap into the community. And I think a lot of them failed. They failed the community badly, but UCSF have done a phenomenal job during COVID as well, getting into the community and helping support folks when a number of those other health organizations in the city didn't. And I've been talking to a lot of them, and now they're trying to come around. But again, proactive is the way. If you want to build this gap with the Black community, you got to be seen, right? Too many of these doctors are just hiding behind the scenes. They don't want to come out and talk. And again, it's just about being real. So we appreciate you all just coming on and being honest and being upfront. Because a lot of times, we're missing that gap, all because folks don't want to come and just be honest, and when you don't know, you don't know. And I think that was one of the big lessons they learned from COVID. It's just one thing to just say, we don't know. And we had some really good doctors come on before the end of the year talking about it. There's so much information that's out there, and it's just like, sometimes you just have to be honest and say, we don't know 100%, but these are our best shots, right? Instead of just being like, oh, it's this, or being general, and then the information come out the other way. I think it turns people off. So again, it is relationship building. We're going to continue in 2022 building these relationships with our medical folks. It starts with this conversation, and we're going to continue to do more. And we're looking forward to working with you all to see how that we could do a little bit more of the outreach in our community when we talk about this brain health. Dementia and Alzheimer's is a big thing in our community. I know a lot of folks who are dealing with their family members. And, we want to encourage our young folks because we don't want to get it labeled or stigmatized as this is an old folks disease. We want to make sure that our young folks know, like, hey, no, this is something we need to attack young. Because again, like Doc said, as you get up there in age, there's nothing we could do about it. So again, it's just bracing the young generation, informing them, bringing this education and awareness. It starts with segments like this tonight, getting this information out to the community so that we can continue the conversation. But we have to follow up and we have to come up with planning in the future, because I think it starts with education first and then getting out in the community and doing the work. And sometimes in 2022, I'm going to be holding a lot of people accountable with not just saying meet people where they at and actually meet people where they at. Because a lot of time, and I know, Doc, you out in the community. I seen you at a couple of community events. So I know you out there with the people. But too many times, I'm on these meetings, I'm in here, I'm around these community folks, and everybody's always talking about, we got to meet people where they at. Okay. But then, the flip side of it, you hear them saying, well, they got to come down to our office. They got to come do this process. I'm like, that's not meeting people where they at, right? Our people is up on them hills in them projects. We got to go knock on them doors. We got to go to them community centers. We got to go to those rec halls where the people at. That's meeting people where they at. So, this year we're going to do a lot of that. But we got to really change some of these slogans that people just love to use. And I see you all are doing it. I've seen you at a number of events. Doc, and that's where it starts, man. The community have to see the face. They got to put a name into the face and just make sure that they are who they are. So I appreciate you coming out and meeting people where they at. But there's a lot of people who say they meet people where they at and they're not meeting people where they at. And we just got to make sure that these services get to the folks. We got a conversation coming up with sickle cell, and that's one of the biggest conversations that a lot of people have reached out to us about this conversation, that there's funding and there's donors that's getting donated for this research. But when it comes down to the patient, they're not getting the support services needed. We got to change that. We got to make sure that the resources are getting to the people. And if that's just getting them in with free services, that's what it is. But we just got to make sure that's happening in 2022. So with that being said, before we end today's show, if there's anything that you all would like to say to the community, please go ahead and do it now. We have your information up on the screen. If anyone reaches out to us, we'll make sure we connect them with you all. If there's any flyers or digital events or any events that's going on that you all would like us to get out to community, please email them to us. Any digital flyers or any events that UCSF or the neuroscience is going to have, so that we can get community folks involved and get them out there for those participation. If y'all have any blood draw events or EKG scannings or whatever you guys are doing for community, we want to get our folks down there and get them tested. And, we definitely would love to partner further some of the events that we have for you guys to table and just get that information out to the community.
Absolutely. I think I just want to thank each and every one of you for allowing Ashley and I the opportunity to speak with you this evening. And thank you so much, John. You're really a pillar, I feel like, in the community with regards to this work. And it's tremendous to see individuals like yourself involved. I know we covered a lot of serious topics. I know we have a tremendous amount of work to do, but we can do it and we can get there, but we're going to have to do it together. I truly believe in my heart of hearts that we can get to a better place, but we're going to have to link and we're going to have to do it together. So thank you all.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, just to tail onto that. Yeah, thank you so much for having us. We're super excited about what the future holds. We really want to get the community. We've already started the work. We want to keep going. We want to expand. We really want to expand to various communities. It's important work. We're here to do it. We have the passion and the drive to do it. So thank you for having us.
No problem. Thank you all for coming up, giving your time so patiently. I know we was trying to get this done before the end of the year, but what a way to kick off the year with you all. And again, phenomenal job that UCSF is doing, reaching out to community. It takes time to build these partnerships and relationships, but we will get there. We'll be in solidarity with you all as we are taking health and wealth in 2022 the forefront of the Black issues that we need to address and fix, as we are in a crisis. When we talk about health, so much of the health crisis are being overlooked by COVID, and we know in our community there's a number of health issues that are not being addressed that are really impacting our community. So all of 2022, we're going to be addressing health and wealth on this platform, and we thank you all again for being a part of this tonight. UCSF is doing a phenomenal job of engaging with community, and we're looking forward to do more work as we continue to bring these awareness and education information to our community to make sure that our community get the services and resources that is needed. Thank you all for tuning in for tonight's segment of our Educational Thursday. We are getting ready to start wrapping up into this new year for more and more conversations. This first Sunday conversation we're going to have with community is going to be on the 16th, and we are talking sickle cell. As we know, sickle cell is one of the issues that are impacting our community. We got some phenomenal doctors and folks that are in the sickle cell arena that is going to bring a lot of information to the community. So we are looking forward to that. And then our Hidden Gem segment will continue next Tuesday as we continue to highlight those businesses and those leaders of those organizations that are doing the positive things that impact us. So we're just looking forward to getting started. And I'm looking forward to getting back on my feet, getting out in the community, doing the things that we need to do to continue to impact our community with a lot of our phenomenal sponsors and our organizations that are working to bless our community, folks like the East Oakland Collective, who are doing food distribution, helping bring some of that food to our community that the doctors are talking about that is needed, bringing healthy organic groceries and bringing stuff that we need. We appreciate you all for being patient with us tonight. There's a lot more coming from both sides of the conversation. We're going to continue to get that information out to the community. But thanks again for tuning in. Be safe out there, you all, this evening, and continue to do the work. Continue to take your health seriously. And please, if you have any questions or any other things that you would like to reach out to our doctors that came on tonight, or any health and dementia issues, please reach out to them, or you can reach out to us and we'll make sure we connect you with them. But until the next show, you all be safe. We love you. Thanks for tuning in. Doc, we'll see you all soon. Ashley, we'll be connecting with you all. We'll be reaching out to our team. Thank you again. What a powerful presentation tonight. I think this was what we needed to start off the year. We're going to start making people think. And I think some of our caretakers and some of the folks in the community are really going to think about what they need to do, getting checked. And hopefully we can get that medical card and we start encouraging some of our young folks in the community to get tested as well. I think that's what we have to do moving forward. So thank you again for coming on, community. Thanks for tuning in. Check out our website. Check out our newsletter. Get all the updated information, things that's going on in the community, top stories and things that's going on. Check us out. We'll see you all next Friday for the State of Black America. If you want to see the State of Black San Francisco and what's going on, y'all want to hear about it, come out, check it out, see what's going on. We'll be at City Hall on the front steps, and our mayor will be out there as well. So looking forward to seeing you all next week. Have a good evening. We'll see you all Tuesday evening.